Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining our webinar. We are super excited to be launching our series with Dr. Madden, with Dr. Jennifer Madden with Leverage Point Development. This first webinar in the series is around nonprofit management fundamentals training. Or it's a training webinar. And so super excited to be able to kick off this series that allows us to dive deeper into various sort of organizational capacity concerns, issues, things that have come up for our funded partners. And so, kick off the series. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Jennifer Madden.
All right, good morning. I am incredibly excited to be here today. And I have a good chunk of information to share with you that will be a nice launching part for our journey. And so super excited. I want to just say that feel free to, if you have questions, raise a hand, put it in the chat. It is my responsibility to make sure that you get the gifts. So if you feel like there's something that you need a little more understanding around or some additional examples about, like, this is safe space and I'm here to make sure you get all the gifts. And if you have a question, the likelihood that somebody else has that question is extremely high. So I encourage you to, ask the questions, push the envelope, engage in some dialogue, or just sit back and listen and go back and listen, or whatever it is that you need. I'm super excited to already see some of you on my schedule. So I'm going to jump in. And again, anytime you need something, just make it known and we'll make sure that you get what you need in order for you to get all the gifts today. So I'm going to jump in and I'll do a little more deep dive of introduction once I open up my slides. And again, I invite you to engage as much or as little, but know that I'm here to make sure that I give you everything I got so that you can be most impactful in your work. So I am going to share my screen and get right started. Okay. All right. So I am very excited about our training series, and I'm going to be with you for the next 7 sessions, and we got a lot to cover. So here is how I've lined up the progression of the work. I'm starting today with our nonprofit management fundamentals, and then I'm going to take us into fund development strategy, because that's what we need to ensure that we have those components in place so we can raise the resources and be impactful in our work. And then that rolls nicely into grant writing fundamentals, just some components. I know you've been successful with your grant writings, and I just want to provide you some tips and insight that could be very helpful for your work. I also have some management and leadership fundamentals that I think can be incredibly impactful for you as well. And then we're going to enter into some fun things around design thinking and human-centered design. I'm going to put some tools in your toolbox in that regard. And then we're going to wrap up the series with some strategic planning. So just a bundle of goodness to help you in your journey. So I want to just kind of give you a little bit about me. I'm Dr. Jennifer Madden. I am president of Leverage Point Development, but I'm a very conservative entrepreneur, so I keep a day job. And in my day job, I am the dean for the School of Business at Linfield University. That's in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon. As you can see, I have a tremendous amount of school loan debt. Case Western Reserve University, where I have a PhD in management and a master's in nonprofit management, and my bachelor's degrees are in economics and American studies. And I also have some other credentials that I'm pretty excited about. A certified fraud examiner. I don't necessarily use that credential, but when in higher education, in schools of business, accounting and finance faculty always think that they're smarter than the management and marketing faculty. So I just had to let them know I can be an accountant. I just like management better. So, and I also am ESPE certified, and that's emotional and social intelligence. Emotional intelligence is an incredibly powerful tool. It's baked into all of this work. So I show you how to tap into those essential skills around emotional intelligence so that it enables you to do your work really, really well and be impactful. And that's sprinkled all throughout the work. I'm also an incredibly good teacher, and I've gotten some awards around that. So I'm bringing all the gifts to make sure you get the tools in your toolbox that you need in order to be impactful in your work. I can't say that enough. Some of my gifts, I'm a design thinker, and you will learn about this later, but it's simply the ability to imagine a future that doesn't yet exist. I would argue that you all are also design thinkers, and I'm going to put some tools in your toolbox so that you can sharpen that ability as well. I'm a strategist, always thinking about how I can connect things to strategy, how I can use strategy to have impact. A collaboration maker. My dissertation research is all about building high impact collaborations. There are things that we can do as organizations that are much greater if we can do them in partnership than we can alone. And if we can learn how to be better collaborators, it can be impactful in our work. A solution finder. We train a lot of problem identifiers, but what we really need are solution finders. And so those techniques and skills are also incorporated into the work. But my biggest gift, my superpower, is my ability to bring ideas to fruition. And those are my gifts. I'm also proud to be author of Interorganizational Collaboration by Design, and this is based on my dissertation research. And the book just really speaks to, how ordinary organizations can tap into their potential and secure dollars to just make incredible things happen on the front lines in communities and have impact. So I just tried to put it together. I still need to put together a more friendly version, but it's an academic book, but we'll get there. And so my photo montage, I'll start at the top is Linfield University. It's a beautiful university in the Pacific Northwest. And next, you'll see this is my husband Khalil and I. We're in Rome, and this is when I was working on my doctoral work, and I realized I was on to something incredibly powerful. And it's true that sometimes you have to go outside of your home space to realize your bigness. And so I want to help connect you to your bigness, and you can see the power in your intensity as leaders trying to have impact in communities. And I want to connect you back to that power so that you can continue to do impactful work. And this next picture is my husband and I were in Egypt. And you'll have to ask me how we got to Egypt. It's a very long story. But the most beautiful part about the photo for me is that we've just gotten off of a hot air balloon ride that I swore I was not going to take. And it was probably one of the most amazing things I've ever done. And so sometimes we have to walk a pathway and be willing to take risks because something amazing can happen. And if we're willing to walk that pathway and be prepared for that pathway, we just never know what can happen. So it's the image just reminds me that that there's some things that we have to say no to, but then there's some things that we should say yes to. And that journey becomes very powerful. And so we were in Egypt with my dad. And so now my dad thinks he's supposed to, go everywhere with us. So we're in Lesotho. This is my dad and I in Lesotho, the country that is completely surrounded by South Africa, the one they based Wakanda off of. And so I always tell them, I tell my siblings, I'm getting all the inheritance because I took them to Wakanda and nobody can top me on that. So if he's got anything left, I'm getting it. So anyway, just a little about me. But really, I am here to talk about nonprofit management fundamentals. And again, ask me questions, pause me, raise your hand. I'm here to make sure you get the gifts. I baked in moments to pause and ask questions. So it's going to be a great journey, and it starts today. So let's get to it. I want to talk about the roles of nonprofit boards. I'm going to talk about the role of the executive director, and I'm going to give you some tips on building a better board. And later, I'm going to give you a sample board manual because it's a super clever tool to just know, you get this new board or building a board. What if you had this great board onboarding guide and board manual? And so I'll make sure you get a copy of that because it'd insightful to see what one might look like, and then you cherry pick the things that can work for you, replace the things that pertain to you. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I have a lot of best practices ready for you. So I'm going to jump in with the first part of this is the role of the nonprofit board. So the nonprofit board, it has many names. We've heard it. The board of directors, the board of trustees, a governing board. It has many names, but they all have the same responsibilities. And these responsibilities can really be, made clear by outlining them in this kind of 10 basics. And it's interesting because these 10 basic responsibilities crossed these 3 different roles. The first role is all about setting the direction of the organization. And then the second role, there are a cluster of responsibilities around making sure that the resources are necessary for the organization. And then the third is about providing oversight. So we're gonna pop into these 3 roles, but I want to just pop out just for a second and just speak a little bit about the board. As nonprofit organizations, we all have boards of directors, and we all have people who want to support the work. And I just can't say enough about the importance of your board. These are your number 1 volunteers. These are the people who are as passionate as you are about the organization. And if we want to have strong organizations, we need to build our board, get our top volunteers, build their capacity so they can be as impactful as we are in this work that we're trying to achieve. So when we talk about nonprofit fundamentals, we have to start with that board, because we need to build our first, our starting team and make them have the ability, give them the ability, the tools, the skills, and have insight on what our expectations are from them and what their expectations are for us. I can't tell you the number of times that nonprofits struggle to find good board members. And we can talk about places that we can look for good board members, ways that we can support and build our board, because when we have a strong board, our organizations can have an even greater impact. We're thinking about, how do we build a board? What skills do they need to have? And I put that information together because this is an incredibly important and strong starting point. Okay, I just wanted to give you a reason to believe, why this information is important. All right, so going back to my slides. All right, so this first role, setting the direction of the organization. It is the board's responsibility to determine the mission and purpose. When you have your strategic planning, you want to review your vision, mission, values, it starts with the board. They make sure that the organization is in alignment with what the organization should be doing. The board's responsibility to make sure that the organization has strategic plans in place, or is in the midst of strategic planning, or the strategic plan, the organization is moving in the direction of the strategic plan, or it's time to do a new strategic plan. This effective planning sits squarely in the responsibility of the board. It's also the board's responsibility to build a competent board. So they need to recruit new members, they need to orient, new members, they need to evaluate their own performance in the strategic plan. Whenever I'm doing strategic planning for organization, the board has their own set of goals that they need to set for, they need to achieve and actualize for the organization. So these are the 3 core responsibilities for boards as we think about setting the direction. All right. In the second role, it's all about the resources. It is the board's responsibility to ensure adequate financial resources are available for the organization. Yes, fundraising. It's a board's responsibility to be fundraisers and friend-raisers, a key core responsibility. It's the board's responsibility to enhance the public standing of the organization. They need to be the biggest champions for your organizations, spreading the good news and and recruiting support for the organization. It's also the board's responsibility to select the chief executive. So if you call yourself a CEO or an executive director, it's the board's responsibility to hire that chief executive officer, that executive director. The executive director's responsibility is to then hire the rest of the staff. That is where the board stops, only with the executive director hire. And then finally in this cluster, they have to support and evaluate the executive director or the CEO. Again, regular evaluations and support of the executive director. And then in this third piece, and then I think I have some questions in the chat. In this third role, I'll take those after this. It's board responsibility to provide oversight. And again, just looking at the programs and services, just making sure it is consistent with the mission and vision of the organization. The board has to provide financial oversight, making sure that there are controls in place and policies and procedures around assets and financial systems. And then finally, ensuring legal and ethical integrity, making sure those 990s get filed and making sure that the organization is operating ethically. So essentially, that is where you stand when we think about the 10 responsibilities. Now, I'm going to see if I think I have some questions in the chat. Okay. And let's see. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Yes. All right. Good. Okay. Making sure none of those questions are for me. So again, 10 basic responsibilities across 3 roles: setting the organizational direction, ensuring necessary resources, providing oversight. Now, in the chat, I want you to tell me, where do you think your organization, your board, what are the strengths of your board? Do you think it's in org direction, or maybe specifically in planning? Do you think it's in the fundraising and that role too, the necessary resources? Or do you think the strength of your board is in this oversight, like they're really thinking about and connecting to the different programs and services? So just in the chat, drop, where do you think your areas of strength when you think about your board? Okay, somebody needs a new board. Okay, they already know. All right, excellent. Okay, that's very fair. Okay. Okay, good. Direction, oversight. Okay, good. This is great. Then if you're trying to figure this out, this is a good start. Need the rest. Okay, organizational. Okay, you do all the rest. This is why you need to build a strong board, so your board can help you do more of the work that you already have to do. Okay, good. That's excellent. Some of us have boards that are really good at many components of this. Okay, okay, good. Learning the board, excellent. Okay, good. Fundraising, excellent. All right, oversight. Okay, wonderful. Okay, good. These are all excellent. All right, wonderful. Yes, excellent. Okay, excellent. So we can see that that there are components of these wins across our different boards, and it's really helpful to kind of see everything in one kind of space, so you get a sense of when you're trying to recruit new board members, or when you're thinking about how to build the capacity where you can kind of, anchor and build from. So, just again, sometimes not only are the basic responsibilities important, but also it's interesting to think about the duties that board members carry out. So again, we talked about the ethical and legal responsibility. And again, that's specifically making sure that those 990s get filed. Also, there's this idea of this duty of care. And again, we saw that throughout those 10 basic responsibilities. It's just making sure that the due diligence is completed when it comes to the nonprofit organization. And then there's this idea of duty of loyalty, that the needs of the nonprofit organization comes first. And then thirdly, of course, the duty of obedience, that there's compliance with the laws and the mission of the organization. So we could also think about the duties of the board: duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. And it's all about making sure the organization is completing the due diligence, making sure the organization is the priority for the board members, and then making sure that the mission is first for the organization. So we think about these boards and what they need to do, and it's really super helpful to understand what they're required to do, and so it gives us a nice strong foundation to build from. So I thought it also would be useful to think about the different types of boards. So we have the typical, there's a range of between elected, self-perpetuating, appointed, hybrid, and also ones that I think are important are this idea of advisory councils. And so let's just kind of unpack some of these just so that you have some insight on that. So when we think about elected boards, these are boards where it's most common to have elected boards in advocacy organization, and membership serving or member serving organizations will often have elected boards, and the membership elects the board members. Sometimes the terms are short, and sometimes the skills can be uneven because people are electing these board members based upon if they are active in the community or they've gone out to to get support for having them placed on the board. And so most our typical nonprofit structure doesn't have the elected boards, but lots of advocacy organizations or membership organizations might have elected boards. The self-perpetuating boards, these are the ones that we typically have. And the self-perpetuating boards, new members are selected by existing members. So if you think about your board and you're thinking about if you're trying to grow or build your board, the existing board member might say, oh, I know someone who's interested in being a board member. And you might have a committee, a recruiting committee on your board. And so that committee's responsibility is to identify potential board members. And there should be a process on how they get familiarized with the organization. And again, this process can work really well because it creates stability for the nonprofit, in that they know that, for example, your bylaws outline, term limits, and they know every 3 years, that they need to identify new board members, or they might have them staggered. And this also is useful because when we do this work correctly, and I'll speak to this a little more when I'm talking about best practices, if we understand what the needs of the organization are, and then we start to recruit new board members based upon those needs, then it allows us to have a board members with a variety of skills that the organization can tap into. So that becomes really nice. And then there's some appointed boards, and this type of board structure happens typically for public organizations, public service, government type organizations, where the members are selected. You've seen likely in your cities where, the mayor appointed such and such to serve on the X school board, or some other kind of a government organization. Sometimes there's ex officio members, and maybe there's a commitment that's lacking because, someone's, voluntold you that you need to serve on the board, or you just happen, your position also means a seat on a different board, or a seat with an organization on their board. So yeah, that's good. And then, of course, there are some hybrid boards, and this includes a mixture of maybe a self-perpetuating plus appointed board member. So, and I want to put a pin in this because there's also this idea of advisory councils. I love advisory councils because they can serve as a resource for our organizations. They don't have any legal responsibility. We can set guidelines that kind of outline what our expectations for them are. They can be established in our bylaws or not, and they can they're super helpful because they can provide technical assistance and also serve as advocates. They can also populate our committees and important things like that. So advisory councils are an underutilized asset that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So what type of board does your organization have? And again, many likely have the self-perpetuating boards, but I just want to double check in to see in the chat. So is anyone using a different type of board for your nonprofit organization, like an elected or an appointed or a hybrid, or is it all around the existing board members? Excellent. Really identifying, okay, excellent. Okay, good. All right, perfect. Then this is great because the advisory council is going to be your next tool that we can type in. Oh, okay, so we do have an elected board. Okay, good. That's good to know. Wonderful. All right, so we'll look to you to give us some insight on how you've been able to tap into some of this possibility around some of these elected boards. Okay, and then there's some hybrid boards in the room as well. All right, good. This is good to know. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to take a pause now because I'm hopeful there's some burning questions about boards in the room. And I want to just see if, take a pause and see if there's some questions. So either feel free to put your hand up or unmute yourself or put a question in the chat. So tell me about your boards a little bit. Good. Oh, I tell you what, I know I asked you about the strength across the different areas. Let's just drop a scale from 1 to 10, like 10 would be like a super fantastic, undeniable rock star board, and we're saying a 1 is, we're not there. Drop me a number so I can get a sense of where you feel your board is on the scale from 1 to 10. Okay, 5, 6, 8, good. Okay, all right. Not terrible. This is good. Okay. Or okay. So we have this 2 in here, which is terrible, but that's that elected board. And we said that sometimes those elected boards can be tricky. Right. Good. And okay. Yes. All right. We expected those things. All right. All right. Okay. Let me see. I also think I had a question in here as well. Let's see. As a former executive director, I've observed that although the agency does great and exciting work with the community and programming, the board can sometimes be disconnected from the agency's operations and accomplishments. Do I have any tools or strategies that you can suggest for keeping the board engaged and enthusiastic about ongoing events? Yes. I'm going to get you some best practices. So I'm going to save that and see if those things are helpful. Secondly, best way to actively engage board members, conduct outreach. Okay, yes. Okay, I'm gonna hit some of those in the best practices, Marty. So be not afraid. Good. Any other board? Okay, on our board size. Okay, we are a small board. I feel we need more active, but worry about too big. Okay, so honestly, Shelley, that's a fair question. The size of the board, because we need to make sure we have a quorum in order for us to conduct business of the organization. But given the amount of work, you're thinking about 7 people. Is that enough for the organization to get the work done? So the answer is yes. You can make a 7-member board work, but you would have to activate your committees. And so if you have 7 strong board members that are willing to do additional work by leading committees, then you can turn that 7 board members easily into, 35 board members if each of those 7 members had a 5-person committee. So you could keep the simplicity of a 7 board member strategy if you exercise and had active committees. So there's a way to work nicely with smaller boards. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, it doesn't have. Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, thank you. That's an incredible idea, and I worry, about the cumbersomeness of getting more members, but that's a really, really fantastic idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And this is also the power of the advisory board. And so, you know, if you create an advisory board, it's like having like a pool of potential board members that you could tap into. So don't underestimate the power of some of your committee work. Okay. And again, if you can generalize some of your questions about the board so that you don't feel like, oh, I'm talking poorly about my board. No, this is, we're just trying to see if you have some specific or general questions so that they can be addressed, or you can save them because we'll have more questions after I've gone through all the slides. But if I'm going to cover the information in the slides, I will belay that until we get to that point. So again, good. Do what makes you comfortable. Okay, good. All right, let's see. Our board is working on a handbook. Yay! That's best practice. It's to document the roles and responsibilities of the board that includes our governing practices, etc. So yes, a handbook is incredibly useful. I'm going to give you a sample for your handbooks, and it can not only have things like, okay, these are the roles and expectations of the board. It's also a great place to put, here's our history of the organization. So imagine you get new board members and they get this lovely board book, and it has all the information that they need in a digital file or, binder. You remember those old days when we used to have to print stuff out, but now they can get a link to a Google Drive, and you can have like, here's the history, here's the mission, here are many profiles of all the other board members. Here's some of the programs of the organization. So right there's just like a ton of resources available for the board members to have, which really just enables them to be good in their work. So that's important. All right, good. Let's see. All right, have a board meeting. Yes, okay, good. All right, just holding a little bit of space and to see if there are any other questions before I continue to move forward. Okay.
Dr. Madden,
Yes.
I had a question. Is there any reason or rhyme why a self-perpetuating board should ever become a hybrid?
So it could be that we have organizations in the room that have both self-perpetuating and elected pieces. So it could mean that maybe your organization works in one way you're trying to activate young people is that they get to control, I'm making this up, 2 seats on your board. And so to say that we respect what you believe is important, and we're going to allow you to elect 2 young people who will serve as members of the board. And so you might go about your self-perpetuating board, but you save 2 slots for this group of active young people where they get to elect 2 people to your board. And so now you have a hybrid board in that there's self-perpetuating components, but there's also elected components. And this also speaks to an earlier question on ways that you can keep the board engaged. Because if you have that, I've made this up, this hypothetical or group of community folks that elect 2 people to serve on the board, they have been very active in getting people and getting these 2 young people on the board, and those 2 young people have to be responsive to those constituents, and so they stay engaged. And I always believe that what people co-create, they sustain. And so by having that group of folk elect 2 board members, now they're engaged and connected to what their organization is doing. So that's one made up example of how that could work. Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's
absolutely.
very helpful.
Yes. Alicia, you have a question? I see a hand.
Good morning. Good morning. I put it in the chat a couple of times and maybe I missed it, but I know that it's coming through the chat. I'm just wondering, will the slides be provided? Because I'm like taking pictures, trying to take notes, but
oh no, you're getting this stuff. All of this is you. Yes, these are your slides.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is great
You're
information.
welcome. Yay, outstanding. Good. Are there places, organizations who train board members? Yes, like right now, this is training. Like we should have had you bring them to this situation. But yes, there are other places that you can, you know, it's highly expensive places like Bridgespan, you know, to places where sometimes foundations will fund technical assistance, where there's board training or board development. So absolutely, there's lots of potential possibilities for board training. Board training is probably one of the top, you know, training opportunities that nonprofits tap into. Strategic planning, board training, all can be connected to capacity building, or, you know, capacity building can be a form of board training, is a form of capacity building. So yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, good. All right. Okay, I will continue to share my slides. All right. Okay, now I want to just talk a couple of things about the role of the executive director. These are things that you know, but I just put together like a little top 10. 10 is my number today. So when we think about the 10 CEO or executive director responsibilities, a commitment to the mission. You got that all day, right? Lead the staff and manage the organization. Yes. Exercise responsible financial stewardship. Lead and manage fundraising. The board helps you with that, but the executive director leading and managing fundraising is critical responsibility. Ethical standards, accountability, compliance, same as the board. Engage the board in planning and lead the implementation. Often in the strategic planning work, again, the board, the way that I do strategic planning, for example, the board has the big picture vision. The staff has the implementation strategy that connects up to that bigger vision. The staff is responsible for implementation. And so that executive director needs to lead that implementation strategy. Develop future leadership, absolutely. Cultivating their staff, their team, core volunteers, potentially identifying board, you know, candidates. Building external relationships, being an advocate for the organization, making sure the programs of your organization are effective, and supporting the board. Those are the 10 critical responsibilities of the executive director. So how does the executive director and the board interacts? So especially when it comes to who leads the organization. Now, in extreme scenarios, it's the executive director manipulates the board, does all of the meetings, you know, and the board is just rubber stamping the initiatives. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that, where that, you know, it's just a very weak board and the executive director is running the board. And I know it sometimes feels very comfortable for the executive directors to just say, okay, you know, my board is not great and I just need them to not get in my way. But imagine if you could get a board that had capacity and could help you, you know, help you do the work of the organization. That's really the power. That's more important than having a board that just is a rubber stamp. And then there's also the other extreme scenario, which I've also seen, where the board micromanages the organization and completely, you know, usurps the authority of the executive director. That's also awful, 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 you know, and sometimes the executive director, the CEO may believe that the board is too overbearing or gets into the day-to-day of the organization, which is not the board's role or responsibility. And so these are two extreme examples that I have seen in real life, but it's really not helpful for having a thriving organization. You know, what really works is this partnership between the executive director and the board. And, you know, this partnership can be executed in a variety of ways, but it is the board and the executive director do work closely together, and the board chair manages the board, the executive director manages the staff, the board chair and the executive director have very close working relationships. And that's a powerful way to move forward. And it doesn't mean, and this is important because I've seen a lot of nonprofit organizations where it's just the executive director who knows the board. That's not what I'm suggesting. It's really good that the board is exposed to all of the programming and the different activity that happens in the organization. And sometimes that's made so during board members when there are presentations or information from other key staff members or other departments within the organization, so that the board is exposed and can get excited about the work of the organization through all these different lenses, not just that of the executive director. So it's really powerful when you figure out which way works best for you as you navigate those extremes that don't work well at all, the extreme of a weak board and the extreme of an overbearing board. So also, again, this speaks to, this reaffirms the clear line between what is the responsibility of the board and what is the responsibility of the executive director. Again, the board only hires and evaluates the executive director. The executive director's responsibility is to manage all of its staff. Those are the distinctive points that are critical. All right, so let's pause and take some questions, see if there are any thoughts. All right, so let's see. Let's see how you feel about executive directors that are also board members, and how do you evolve out of that scenario? Okay, so it's interesting because there are lots of examples of executive directors who have a ex officio role on the board, and that I don't mind that at all, Sarah, because the executive director is working closely with the board anyway. They're connected and always aware because they have to provide information or they have to provide insight. So the executive director working with the board is quite typical. That won't change, and so what may change is if that executive director might have or may not have the ex officio role on the board. Now, what also typically happens is that you have a working board, and so young organizations will often have a working board, and that means that the board is more engaged in the day-to-day than they would typically be as a governing board. And that happens because as we grow, as our organizations grow, we depend upon that work. Remember, I started the conversation saying that, our board of directors, these are our top volunteers. We transition that board into more of a governing board. So they're not doing some of the tasks that typically a staff person would do. Okay, all right, good. All right, let's see. For young nonprofits that are created by a founder who is ex-director, need time to mature those. Okay, so the founding, Tammy, could you reframe your question for me so that I understand it? For young nonprofits that are created by the founder who is ex-director.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I was trying to get at is that when you are a younger nonprofit, and maybe you are the founder of that nonprofit, and you also, as the founder, are the first executive director to get things going.
Yes.
I totally 100% agree with everything you're saying. I mean, it's spot on,
Yes.
However, when you're younger, it's like a toddler, you don't teach a baby or how to walk before they learn how to crawl, and so on and so forth, to running and riding a bicycle and on and on. But
yes,
when you're a younger nonprofit, it's harder, like you said earlier, to get the right people on your team.
Yes.
one.
Yes.
And two, you have to get things going before you can start setting up policy and getting things framed properly when you're younger. So
Mhm.
one of my questions, which follows the statement that I made, was maybe share stages of growth over time
Mhm.
when a nonprofit should get to this level of management, because for younger nonprofits, even from my experience, if you don't have a board, even if it's not as it's not defunct, but it's not as operable as you want it to be, some funders won't fund you without having a board. So if you could talk a little bit about that, because that's where the challenge is. The challenge I see here is moving, and how quickly can you move to an operating governing board at the level you're talking about? How soon should they be doing that, and what steps we should be taking to get there quicker than
Mhm.
maybe some of us on the call have done over the last year or so or whatever in operating. But those are the things that came up for me as you were talking. So I hope that clarified my question or my
No,
comment.
no, thank you. So it's I love the analogy that you talked about. Well, they can't just start walking. Well, honestly, they can, because the hard part is identifying and recruiting board members. And so, because here, imagine this. If you, for example, are building your organization, growing your organization, and you were able to recruit an experienced board member, that potentially could help your organization significantly. Does that make sense? So you would be able to build your capacity by having experienced board members on your board. Now, if you're asking me to say, hey, my organization, the way that I think we could be most impactful is that if we grow up our board members and we want to teach them the skill set, or have them learn. And so in that regard, the development's going to take a little longer, especially if it's going through this natural process. It could be expedited if there's some training and development that happens at the board level. So and there are organizations who grow very quickly and others that grow very slowly, and and honestly, I think I'll answer some of these questions, Tammy, when I go through some pro tips for you. So hold on, and if I don't touch on that, let's revisit that question. Because I think that an organization, in my experience working with nonprofits, if we can build the capacity, the organization has the ability to grow and build and develop at a much faster rate than it would do just on its own. Does that make sense? If you're trying to teach yourself a skill, it will take longer, versus if someone has a skill and is trying to teach you that skill, you may be able to learn more quickly. So if we can get that professional development and capacity building for our board, then we can strengthen our board and then grow the organization. Then the board can build, and then the executive director, you can work on the business of building and developing the organization. Good. We'll come back. Yes. All right. So, and then when I think about this ideal timeline, I often just think about that 5-year mark. If a nonprofit organization can make it beyond 5 years, they are doing incredibly impactful work. That 5-year mark, making it past those first 5 years, those are the difficult, components. But when you make it north of that, you can make it, 10, 15, 25 years. That first 5 years is very difficult for organizations. So my ask is the executive director could be the president of the board. There are only a few instances where I've seen an executive director also serve as the the president of the board. I've seen executive directors serve as like non-voting members of boards, but there are just a few examples that I've seen where the executive director is the president. But the best practices often point to the board president and the executive director being two different positions. Good. Other questions or thoughts? All right, well, let's crack into some of these building better boards, this board insight. And I'm gonna walk through these slowly so that we can really address and answer questions as we go. So sharing my screen back again. All right, building that better board, building our organizations. So some of the best practice around having an effective board, as you can imagine, making sure that your board is responsive and building partnerships with other organizations, this idea of synergy, in that as I opened up with, the ability to do something in the collaborative partnership can be greater than just doing something alone because of the synergy idea, you know? And also, I tell my clients this all the time, we can only be distinctive in our areas of strength. And if we focus on our strengths, that's incredibly powerful. But we're mindful of what our weaknesses are. And sometimes we can mitigate those weaknesses through partnerships. So this is why partnerships become important. And this is why collaboration is important. Having a board that is mission driven, mission first. When you're mission first, you know, when you're working with people and you're working in, you know, on the front lines trying to have an impact in the community, there are going to be challenges. But if your board has a shared vision and is mission driven, its ability to overcome those challenges that are inherent in our work is bolstered, because we can see past some of those obstacles and we keep focused on that big picture. Our eyes are on the prize. And so if we're mission driven and have a powerful shared vision, boy, it's incredibly impactful for the organization. Thinking strategically is another really best practice of the organization, because you're constantly thinking about why you're doing this work in this way, you know, and for what reason. And that's what strategy does. It drives us to this purposeful work, and it makes clear to others, you know, why we're doing the work. This culture of inquiry, asking these questions like, why are we doing this? Why is this important for us to be doing this work in this way? You know, why are we thinking about these partnerships in this way? You know, independent mindedness. We're not distracted by what others are doing. I call it nonprofit anarchy, when like organizations are just going after the resources when it's not like in alignment with what the organization is doing. You know, your ability to move forward, being transparent, and having this commitment, you know, is also important. Having integrity, you know, resources that are sustaining for the organization, also super important. Being results oriented, you know, thinking about how does this advance our strategic planning work? How does this impact our community, the people who we serve, or the reason that we exist? Having those board practices. So putting together those policies and procedures, incredibly important for having an effective board. And this kind of continuous learning, this professional development, it is really important, because oftentimes when we know better, we do better. So imagine, you know, training and building the capacity of your board, your top volunteer, 7 to 20 individuals all in line to help you do better and be more impactful in your work. It's powerful. We're harnessing we're harnessing work. We're harnessing time, talent, treasure that can help the organization flourish. It's really powerful, you know. And revitalization, just this willingness to like be committed and be hungry for new ways of doing, and renewing this commitment, and having this impact. It's really a powerful place when we think about how our boards can be most effective. But let's talk about some components that you've spoken to, that talks about and speaks to nonprofit organizations sort of like life cycles, especially when it comes to board members. So we talked about, you know, the focus of the board. And I talked about often young organizations will start with a working board because they need hands to help do the work. There's so much work to be done, and there's never enough of resources in order to make it happen. So a working board makes a lot of sense for many NASCP nonprofits, you know. But then as you start to grow, then you start to move towards a board that brings credibility to the organization. And I think you also said, Tammy, something about, you know, funders won't fund a stable board, or a board who can demonstrate that they have skills and gifts that they're contributing to the organization. So that also starts to evolve in the focus for the board, having this board for credibility. So you have this board member is an expert in this area, and this is helping the organization, you know, and this other level of expertise, or they're known for doing this, they're advocates and they're supporting our organization by serving on the board. This board for credibility does help the organization significantly. And then as the board starts to grow, develop, and evolve, they become, you know, this board with relevant experience. And so now they know what to do and how to help impact the organization. And so it's really in a very short frame, we can check off this level of focus for our board. And then some of the harder work starts to happen in these next 3 levels, where we're building our board that's going to safeguard the mission of the organization. And then we create a fundraising board, and then we can have this high performing board. And so I'm going to walk us through some of those things so that we can get from this new NASCP working board to, you know, this high performing board. So, okay, I see you here. Tammy, go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned about the working board, and so I just wanted to share, and hopefully others who are probably thinking about this related to what's going on in their organization. And that is, one, what we decided to do, because we're in this in the stage of capacity building as a part of this funded grant, right? What we decided to do as a board with our board members was activate our board. So what we did was we updated our bylaws, and we added a section in the bylaws for board activation. And that is when we have a need, maybe like right now because of COVID-19, and we lost staff, we went on furlough and things like that, then the board had to step up where there were gaps for us in operations. And so we activated the board members to be an active part of what was going on, so that we can maintain the operations from a funding standpoint. To stay up with, you know, requirements and commitments that we had agreed to do from funded, you know, partners, you know. So
yes,
I just wanted to mention that if you're struggling, you're not sure, that, you know, you can take the time to talk with the board and explore other things that you can do as a governing body to augment, change, update some of the duties and responsibility when there's a need for the organization. So just to piggyback off of what you were saying there.
Thank you. Yes, the board, again, our #1 volunteers. And so when we can tap into their skill set and abilities and network, we should absolutely do it. That's what they show up for, you know. That's exactly what they show up for. So is there a list of questions? I think I might have something better. In my best practices is this board commitment that I think could be useful. And that's coming up super, super shortly. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get there. Sharing screen. And here we go. All right. So again, this working boards, again, hands-on roles, raise money, make program decisions, incredibly active. And as Tammy has talked about, they put in their bylaws. This is the beautiful thing about bylaws. You can modify them, change them back. It's a tool for the organization. So working boards can be very, very helpful for you. So When I think about board development, I think that it's incredibly powerful to have skill identification. You want to clearly identify the skills that your board member have so that you can see what skills that you need. You know, what are, and if you think about what the long-term goals of the organization or what skills you need to achieve those goals, and you think about what's missing, then if you've identified the skills of your board members, you can tap into that skill set. So some of the pro tips that I like to use or advise my clients to use is, you know, does your organization have a board matrix? It's just something where you just simply listing the board members and identifying what their skill sets are. And that way you get a sense of, do you have an overabundance of a specific skill on the board and under representation of other skills? And when you have this board matrix, you can be very intentional or strategic about what board member you recruit next, because you're like, oh man, we really need, you know, this skill set is missing. Let's be intentional about, you know, our next board member that we recruit have that skill set so that we can, you know, help the organization by filling that gap. Sometimes a personal skills assessment. I like to do like a personal SWOT analysis, have the board members at your next board member meeting, or, you know, give them this assignment ahead of the board meeting, and they can report out during the board session, this kind of personal skills assessment, personal SWOT analysis. There might be some things that you learned that you didn't know that could be an asset to the organization. So the board matrix, simple example, you could just talk about, you can either look at different industry knowledge or experience, and then list the different board members and just do a simple checkbox on who has what skills. Or you can list technical skills and experience, you know, things that you need that you can determine if your board member has that skill set. And so then just this simple matrix allows you to take a snapshot to know, man, if we had somebody with some human resource management skills on the board, that would be incredibly useful. We could have someone we could tap into or ask about. There was someone, oh man, we have an overabundance of people with, you know, IT skills, but no marketing skills. The next person you recruit, maybe you want them to have some marketing expertise. So the board matrix can help you sort of, you know, catalog the skill sets of your board so you can be very intentional as you recruit new board members. And then I also spoke about the personal SWOT analysis. You know, this is, you can have again, send out this sheet, or during the board meeting, I'll often, you know, you're just tell a person, just make a little X on a sheet of paper and put SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What are some of your strengths? You know, these are my strengths. And then they write down what are some of their weaknesses. You know, I'm super busy, so I'm not available on the weekends. You know, so you know not to ask them to join in your weekend activities, because that's not something that they can participate in. Opportunities. Oh, I'm taking this new job. I'm starting this new job, and I'll have access to, you know, a mailing list that we could, you know, potentially support the organization. You know, or threats or challenges. Sometimes threats feels like, oh, that's too much. Challenges, you know, and sometimes a weakness and a challenge could be, don't let the words, you know, get in the way. All you're just trying to do is capture some information so that you have this information available to you. All right, I'm gonna take a pause. Go back again. Skill identification. I think that's a powerful way to intentionally build your board. Okay, I'll pause for a second to see if there's any thoughts or comments on that. Yeah, makes sense. Do you have template or electronic book or document? Marty, that's fair. Yes, I'm going to send out a sample board manual that'll have some of these tools in it for you. So yes. Again, I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. So if I got some tools, I'll get you some tools.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes.
Or it's not really a question, it's more of a statement, I guess. So I had mentioned earlier about the board activation, but what I found is it's better, and I'm not I won't say better, but I'll say it's ideal if you can get someone with experience or individuals, professionals that are experienced. And what I found is the more I talk to my board members, I tend to have now acquired individuals who are nearing the end of their career, and they don't really want to be idle, and they have time on their hands.
Yes.
They're getting ready for retirement. They tend to be, for me, the best board members because
Sure.
they have more time to devote
Y-
than working professionals, because it's kind of hard to work a full-time job during the day and then also try to support a nonprofit that's also running during the day. That I found that my board has become more senior individuals. And it's good because now I can incentivize them too and get that volunteer work out of them at the same time. So just a
Mhm.
little point that I just wanted to add in there to complement this wonderful, workshop you got here. So
No, absolutely. It can work in so many ways. It's absolutely true that you can get folks who are retiring, who've been active and still want to give back. But also on that other end of the spectrum, you have young professionals who want to build their resume, and having a board position looks really great. And so they're hungry to put their newly acquired degrees into practice and put the skill into practice, and they will be also actively engaged in the work. So, and there are also other places where, like a volunteer match, and I think that's in one of my other slides, that you can look at all of these leadership programs that they have in cities and communities. All of these people have these new skills that they want to put into practice. So you have to, the power is in making the ask. Lowell, you had a hand up. I'm gonna make sure, I want to make sure I get it.
Yes, I just want to reiterate what the young lady just said, because I'm the finance director of on my nonprofit. And recently I was on the board of another, just on the finance committee, and they tapped me to be the board chair. And I'm a retired person with a finance background. But I'd also say that what you don't want is have the entire board have all that experience, just like you said. A good mix is great, because sometimes you can get set in your ways, whether you're young or old. A good mix is great.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Lowell. And everybody wants a finance person, so you might get some side messages too. Tammy, I see you have another hand.
yeah, so just to compliment what she just said and also what you're saying, and a thought that came up is what I've done too to keep that mix going is I have, and EYC might be proud of me for this. I actually I got the idea from EYC and just some participating in some of the networking stuff. It dawned on me that I should promote some of my peers that were coming through the program into board leadership roles. And so once they pass probation and they get to become an employee, I've actually graduated a couple of people to be on the board who are younger, but also eager to develop new skills and
Excellent.
and so I do think, while it's great to have more senior individuals, you can also give that opportunity to younger individuals coming up through the ranks and have an incentive for them too, to see that there's opportunity to grow and mature and advance within your own company. Right.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to say that too. We have promoted individuals who have done really, really well into leadership roles onto the board.
Excellent. Okay, so Frank had a question. What about relatives on the board or paying board members for their skills to be consultants? Okay, two things. Having a relative on the board, that's acceptable. It's the skill set, especially if they're meeting a need and there's a gap that this person can bring to the organization. That makes sense for me. Paying board members for their skills, that is, we have to be very, very mindful about. Now, let's take, because the word for it is private inurement. It means that the board member can't self-deal. Now, there are ways that we can potentially work with the board. So let's take, for example, I'm making this up, that your board member, one of your board member has a event center, owns their business, they own an event center, and they're willing to, you're planning for a gala and you want to hold it at that board member's event center, but there's a price you have to pay. Now, what you would have to do is pay that would be a business, but you would need to demonstrate an arm's length transaction. And so it would mean something like you get 3 bids for, event centers, and the bid from the business that is owned by your board member gives you the lowest bid. And then the board member would have to recluse him or herself from voting on which of the bids that the organization might take, for example, if it had to go to the board for approval. So in this way, we've demonstrated there's no self-dealing, and we've created an arm's length transaction. So in that way, we could pay that business of the board for the work, but board members are volunteers. I keep saying your board is your top volunteers, so there's not pay. Now, if maybe your board decides to take a leave if you need them to play a role or to be some sort of paid consultant for the organization. But it's very clear that we have to keep these things very separate. Does that make sense for you, Frank?
Let me get the mic. Hold it. Let me get the mic. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, good.
Because I was curious, because if we've had the situations where we've had to have someone come off the board, become a consultant, and then fail.
Yes.
But at the same time, any funds that would go through the company, not to the board member, and then the company can then the company pays the person for their skills.
Sure, but make sure you have the arm's length transaction. So the 3 bids to demonstrate that this is the lowest bid. That board member did not play any role in awarding or suggesting that award went to the organization. Yes.
Okay.
Good. Okay, good. Okay, Erica, what about board members that are also staff members? Our fiscal sponsors board has a few people on it who are getting paid part-time. So this is an example of a working board. And so again, in those early stages of nonprofit organizations, there are a lot of working board members. And it's again, this is the ability to grow your board so that your board is moving into a governing board, demonstrate growth of the organization. So, yes. Okay. All right. Share my screen again. Next, advisory boards. I think advisory boards are incredibly useful. They don't have any legal responsibilities. They can provide technical assistance. They can serve on committees. And for me, in my experience working with organizations, the people part, those essential skills matter. And you could have like a well-oiled machine, your board works really well together. And then you throw this new board member in and they're just like disrupting all of this like goodness that you have going. And this is the powerful thing of an advisory board. You could create an advisory board where this advisory board serves as a pool where you recruit your board members from. And it could be in your bylaws, you can articulate that, if board members might serve, 3 months on the advisory board or whatever length of time, just so you can get a sense of understanding how this individual would work with your existing board, and then you can recruit from that advisory board, or you can have these advisory board members serve on your different committees that really just expands your ability and your the work that you can do. So advisory boards can be an excellent tool for your organization, both for helping you identify and recruit and incorporate new members into your board, as well as having a wonderful pool of committee members that you can tap into. Okay, let's see, wait, I think I got a question here. All right. Okay, now this is a responsive question. Okay, all right, good. Sharing screen back. Okay. Onboarding, orientation. I've heard this so much today, so I'm super excited that that this is on people's minds. So once elected or appointed, you know, it's really important that we acquaint our new members with our existing board members, what the culture of the board is, some of their governing rules, 10 responsibilities, for example. You know, it's also good to understand what the staff is responsible for and their accomplishments, the different programs, where the organization works, the places, the budget. You know, maybe an existing board member will mentor the new board of director. That's a nice way to have some nice orienting and onboarding. And again, the pro tip is creating that board manual. It's just a go-to space to have good information, you know, about the organization. Where a new board member, you know, they're excited to be on your board, but they don't maybe not have all the information. So having that board manual can be just such a great resource that enables that new board member to really be excited and feel like they have great direction. And then the other pro tip is a board commitment form can be incredibly useful. And so a board commitment form, I know you can't read this slide, but I'll break it down in the next slides. But it's just a simple form. You put your logo on and it just says, here are your expectations, you know, as these are the things that we expect from you. Attend meetings, participate in special events, you know, make a personal financial contribution, you know, participate in helping fundraise for the organization, all these things. And then you outline what that board member can expect from the organization. So these things are typically around attendance, making a contribution, being actively engaged, making sure they put the nonprofit first, you know, making sure that they will commit to being knowledgeable or receiving some professional development, and staying informed. So these are typically the areas that the board member, that you're expecting from the board member, voicing their opinions and concern. Again, authority, so that you're a representative of the organization, listening, working collaboratively, and keeping information confidential. So having this is a really strong start. And so one of the questions was, do we have you know, questions for board members? But this board commitment form is like a powerful tool that you can use to say, if you're willing to do these things, you know, this is what we're looking for from a potential board member. And then what the nonprofit commits to, what your organization commits to, making sure they're updated with financial reporting and activities, you know, that the organization is doing, you know, any organizational issues, you know, professional development they can expect, and respond when necessary. And so it's clear what the board member is supposed to do and what they can expect from the nonprofit. So having them actually sign this board commitment, it just demonstrates that this work is serious and these are the things that we expect. And this is what you can expect from us as the nonprofit who, you know, as we ask you to join our board. Okay, so I see some questions. So let me pause here and see what the chat's saying. Yes, you're gonna get a copy of this stuff. Yes. What about the relatives of board payment? Okay, this is internal. Yes, I love internal chat. Yes, you'll get all of this stuff is coming to you. Yes. Good. Any other questions? about the board commitment form or advisory board useful? Can you see it working for your organizations?
Yes, would that same thing apply to the youth board?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you can tailor these things so that it makes sense to, what your organization, the spirit of it is that here's what we expect from you and here's what you can expect for us. And having that level of clarity, it just it levels up the expectation of your board. It's a serious piece. And people get excited about that, and they want to deliver their best work. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we move on?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Just a clarification again, if a board member has a certain expertise and we would like to, we couldn't per se, like you say, pay them for that. But if they were to put in a bid for the project that we were looking to get done, then and we would also put that bid out to the public, then through that process, then they could be paid. I just want to get that clarified.
No, thank you. So the expectation would be, that if they're serving on the board, that they're honestly donating some of that expertise. But there's some things that have to be paid for example, or you were going to pay someone for them anyway. And so in Frank's example, there were people who stepped down from the board in order to serve in a consulting role, and that breaks and makes it extremely clean. But if it was something that we were buying from the board member's business, we just need to demonstrate that there was an arm's length transaction, so that we can demonstrate that there was no self-dealing. And the nonprofit word there is private inurement, because you can't join the nonprofit board so that you can personally benefit. That's why there's this nonprofit first, as meaning that the nonprofit has to benefit. That's the primary beneficiary of the work and the gifts and the tools and the skills is the nonprofit. But if it's like a consulting role, it's likely that the board member will step away from the board. But if it's sort of like you're paying that business, that's a little bit different because you're getting those different bids from different businesses. Is that clear?
Yeah, totally.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
You're very welcome. Please do ask questions. If you're thinking them, likely somebody else is thinking them. So I appreciate you putting your voice in the space.
I have a question based on the statement in the chat about nepotism. So in the short and skinny, can a relative be on your board? Or I'm just reading this chat, this message, what they put in there. What does that mean? Can they or can't they?
It's not, nepotism is not illegal. So it's honestly, there's no nonprofit police, but the thing that will mostly get an organization in trouble is when you start to do political activities. That's the thing that gets most nonprofits in trouble. If you're trying to recruit a board and you have a family member on the board, if you've done the due diligence by saying, listen, we have a skills matrix, and this person has a critical skill that we need, you create defendable space on why you've made these decisions. There's nothing illegal about having family members on the board. Unless there's something in your bylaws that, says something to that nature. But as we all know, bylaws can be changed. Clear?
So thank you. So in general, should the bylaws address nepotism in general? I'm looking at the statement in the chat, or unless you think you need to.
In my experience in looking at bylaws, I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen many sets of bylaws that speak specifically to nepotism. I think I may have seen it in there are some bylaws that do address it. Really, it's many nonprofits, when they take their hits, it's in the court of public opinion. And so this is why it's important to demonstrate, to have your receipts. Like, again, I'm going to bring us back to the skills matrix. If you understand what skills that your board has and needs, and you can identify, here's the person who has these skills, that's why they're on the board. And you've made the argument, you've defended your space. Make sense? And again, that court of public opinion is critical because we depend on gifts, grants, and having bad PR, it turns off funders, it turns off supporters. So we always want to put that nonprofit first. If you're operating duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, then you're just saying, we're doing the best that we can so that we can impact the communities that we serve.
Right.
Tammy? I'm sorry, Frank next.
Yeah,
Tammy, hold on 1 second.
when I was hearing him speak, what I'm thinking about is usually a lot of cases with nonprofits, a lot of us start nonprofits as little, like with family people, all right? Where you guys sometimes a husband and a wife, or a husband and a cousin, a husband, a brother, two brothers, and a lot of times those two brothers or a husband and wife start something, and they do have the skill sets, in place. And as they're doing it originally, it's usually they're coming out of their own pockets, to fund this thing. But as it starts to grow, then they see that some money's coming in. They want to either pay themselves, all right? And I think a fine line comes in there now, because now how do I pay myself and still stay on the board, all right? And still be the chosen board. But I'm saying, but a lot of times it happens because a lot of people think and going to, I had someone ask me the other day, how, like when you get in a nonprofit, I said, no, nonprofits don't operate like that. No, it's not the personal piggy bank, it's a nonprofit. But at the same time, I think when nonprofits are at the beginning stage, I think that's where, 20 years ago, we probably all walked the fine line, all right? But now it's a little bit different. So and that's why I said we had people step away from our board so that they can use their skill set. But in the beginning, I think a lot of us way back when we first started, it was us, all right? So we were the bottle washer, the kitchen operator and everything. And when funds came in, we've, like, hey, shouldn't we be paid?
Yes.
And without PI.
Yes, I understand. And I can't tell you the number of organizations, especially nascent nonprofits, new nonprofits, that think that they're passionate about work, they want to build a board, and then they build the board because, instead of thinking about the skills or the passion, they think that they could just choose people who, won't fire them. That's typically what I hear. I just picked this person who's this family member. But if you're doing a good job with the organization and you build your board based upon the skills and the passion that those top volunteers can bring to your organization, and you're doing an incredible job, nobody's going to fire you. That's not the basis of, if you're doing a good job, you've not made a rationale from it. And then this is the second way, that this was a small nonprofit, and people were just doing the best they can. And this is why the working board is always the starting point. And then you grow and evolve into a governing board, you grow and evolve into a high performing board. So, and this is the pathway that you do it. You get the skills and the capacity so that you can, because when we know better, we do better. So thank you, Frank, for sharing.
Okay, one last thing on that, because I also serve on the board with a church, right, who are 501c3. And a lot of time the pastor is on the board, but the pastor gets paid.
Then the pastor might play an ex officio non-voting role, but just because you're on.
But they vote as well. I'm talking about the pastors I know, they vote because they're usually the founder, and they go like, this is basically my baby. So, I'm gonna be on the board, I'm gonna be voting, and I'm gonna get paid. So is that in violation of the PI?
Well, this is often why church-based nonprofits don't file for 501c3s, because then they're not restricted to those rules. And this is also why lots of faith-based 501c3s have a very difficult time tapping into grant dollars. So it's often the church that supports these faith-based nonprofits, and those just come from donations, to the church or from church members. But if you're trying to build your nonprofit where you're securing contributions from individuals, from foundations, corporate support, then having this governing board is an important piece for you. This is what the foundations are going to look at when they look at who should we entrust the resources to. Are there checks and balances in place, or is it the same person is saying there's no checks and balances in place? There's becomes a much more difficult time in tapping into outside resources, and you can ask faith-based organizations about foundation dollars, and there are very few, funders who fund faith-based organizations, often because of reasons like this. Tammy, and then Lowell.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Frank.
Yeah. So in response to the nepotism things, because that was my comment to a question that was asked about board members, to clarify, I wanted to say that, for the record, you can, if you're looking to bring a family member that is qualified, the best thing to do with what I was saying with my comment was that you want to be careful about nepotism when it's family related candidacy. Because if you are the founder, or you are the person that pretty much started everything and you're small, and you self-select individuals, then you run into the problem of not having a board that will want to stay with you or continue to work with you for the reasons that Dr. Madden said earlier, which is, did you qualify the person? Did you properly set up, bylaws that says how you're going to handle that kind of stuff? So if you're just picking people because they're family members, or you're bringing them on and they're expecting to be a part of the board and get paid and stuff, then that's when you run into difficulties. And as she said about the public opinion piece. So it wasn't to confuse you. It was really to say, hey, don't just make a impromptu decision about a person that's a family member, because typically families, well, why didn't you choose me? I'm a family member. And I'll be the first one to say to my family, I have had family that's, asked me to come and work for me. And I said, well, it's just not my decision. I have a board. And if I'm going to bring you, first of all, I'd have to recuse myself from the selection process. And I would have to let them know and let them be aware that you are a family member, and let them make a decision without my vote. So it just can't be, you making unilateral decisions for the entire board because the person is a family member. That's why I said the nepotism thing. But you can overcome that by having clauses in your bylaws that says how you're going to handle it as a board. And because maybe other board members may want to present one of their family members, or they, but there's a due process for electing someone or selecting someone. And that's the reason why I made those comments. But the other comment that I had was about when it comes to paying, we've got to remember that when you serve on a nonprofit board, like Dr. Madden stated, you are volunteering. Okay. And when you volunteer, and even if you started the company and you put a lot of money in it to get it started, then you should have done the due diligence up front to say to the organization or the entity, the board at that time, even if it's just you or a few people, hey, this is not a donation. I expect to be paid back. When the organization starts to bring in its own money and stuff, I'm gonna give this funds to the organization, but there's an intent to be repaid at a later date. And if you don't do that up front, then you can't come back when in a year or 2 years or 3 years when the organization is bringing in private public funds through grants and other things and say, hey, but I pay into helping this organization get started. Well, then you should have done your due diligence from day one and set up an agreement with the entity that you were giving the money to get it started, but it wasn't going to, you know, I'm expecting this to come back at some point, and you got into a written agreement with the agency so that when they do bring in funds and can repay you, then they can do that. And it's written in there's a formal written agreement about it, but you can't just ask for it or hold that over the organization's head once it does start making money. So you still got to go through the process of treating it like a separate entity from you as an individual, even though you may be the initial founder or and then when it comes to being on the payroll, then you have to recuse yourself from being on the board and be considered as an employee and go through the hiring process. So it's just these things, these corporate management guidelines are put in place legally so that everything is fair, right? Both for the entity and for you as an individual. Because a lot of times companies get started by people, they don't start themselves. So, but there's a process by getting those things started. And that's the reason why I made the comment about the nepotism and these follow-on comments, just to complement what Dr. Madden is saying.
Thank you, Tammy. Lowell?
Yeah, those are great comments. One other thing I want to mention, when you talked about a faith-based organization and the reason why they don't want to be go in and get their status. So I serve at a mega church, and they learned the hard way that make sure you have two separate entities. There's the church, and then you have your nonprofit. And although you may be a Christian nonprofit or whatever, as long as you serve, as long as you prove you can serve the entire community, regardless of their faith, then you can get the funds. So it's like, it's not worth it, the nepotism and bringing in church volunteers, whatever. Get two separate entities. And one last comment, what the young lady said about having that signed document saying get the money paid back, make sure you account for it in your book. So it's right there. It protects you when it says, I'm paying Joe Blow back once I get my $100,000 into this nonprofit. That's it.
Thank you. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen back. Here we go. All right, so in terms of engagement, very good for board development. So board recruitment, you have your bylaws for guidance, and if you have clear terms of engagement for your board members, it can be very helpful. So what their expectations on term, is this a 3-year term? You can serve 2 terms and then you have to take a year off, or you serve 3 terms and then you take a year off before you can be invited back. But having these term limits can be very helpful, because sometimes we need to exit a board member off because they're no longer engaging. You know, I remember serving on the board, and in our bylaws, it had clear guidance around attendance. And so the board chair, before I was preparing to come in as board chair, she was like, I'm going to make sure we clean up the board before we put you in the board president position. And it was all outlined in the bylaws. Bylaws are very powerful tools that we could use to help make a strong organization. You know, what are the officer positions on your board? Making sure you have like a give or get policy. You know, how much are you going to raise, or contribute, and making sure that there's mandatory committee participation and board meeting attendance, just so that people, show up, and because that's the expectations. And if you're clear about the expectations, it's incredibly helpful. And one of the pro tips that I like 100% of the board gives financially to the organization. You know, it's so important because if you're going to go to a funder and say 100% of my board gives financially to this organization, it could be $1, $10. It depends on what they can afford to give. But if 100% of your board gives financially, then you set an expectation of like, we're ready to receive gifts because all of the board is committed. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions about that? How many of your boards are 100% contributing financially to the organization? It's a good standard expectation to set. All right, I'll share a screen again because I just have a couple more. Using time effectively. So sending out the reports ahead of time, the meeting minutes, the expectations, having them do the work so that they're not just coming to the board meeting and just sitting there listening to the executive director give their report or the board chair talking, that you have people's time are so precious that if they're actively engaged, you're just using wisely the time that you have together as a board. You know, having active committees is really important. An annual retreat so you get renewed and reconnected and revitalized about the work, you know, is so important. So again, a pro tip, make good use of board meetings by having robust committees so that there's a doing and a reporting out and more work that the committee can do, and this keeps your board engaged in the work of the organization. And again, I just can't say enough about having these board committees. It allows you to do more with the organization, and then maybe having your board members chair these different committees, and you can just identify chairs. Committees can meet monthly. The agenda of the board of directors, you know, of your board can be driven by these committees. You know, the reports get prepared for the board. It can be very responsive and active in the work. And your committee members can include non-board members. It can include folks that just care about this one thing that the organization does, but they're passionate about it. And so it can be very useful, their energy that they're bringing to the work. And this slide just talks about some resources and support. So having resources for your board, access to training and networking, making sure that they understand the financial reporting. Maybe there's a dashboard created, you know, so that they can have clarity about what the financial positioning of the organization is. And there's lots of websites that I've put in here, you know, that can help your board development. And I'll just say that this work is really important right now because boards can add significant value to your organizations. And as you start to build your capacity and grow as an organization, having an effective board of directors, it really helps the organization to be on a pathway to thriving. So, all right, that I'm going to take our last rounds of questions before we kind of wrap out. So, any other questions in our time together? What do you think about this work? Any other thoughts or questions useful for you? Some of those pro tips. You know, just holding some space for some questions. Any last questions?
Let me open up. Let you see who I am.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You know, I really didn't dress for the occasion, so but here I am. Okay.
That's all right.
No, my question is this.
Yes, sir.
Years ago, I served on a board, and my thing, I've always been aware of that PI thing, and in this board, the president of this board, the president of the board, the organization paid for that person to go get training, right? And that person, when he got training, when he came back, they brought back certificates of training. And after a few times, they said that I'm an expert in a field, but the board, not with mine, but the majority, all right, agreed to pay for the training. But now when that board member takes that certificate or that training and uses it for his own personal benefit or the benefit of his other organization, would that be considered private endowment?
Thank
Because-
you for the question. So it does not actually. And so if your board sends you to, I'm going to make this up. So let's just say your board sends you out and they want you to learn, I'm making up something, I don't know.
Counseling.
Counseling, thank you. That's a great example. Mr. Kelly. So you get certified in counseling and you ultimately decide that you are doing some counseling work on the side or for your business. That's not private inurement because as the executive director, or this is the executive director, or this was the
president,
the president of the board that got trained. It's not private inurement because you're not paying him or her to do the counseling for your organization. Now, if you sent the board president to do counseling so they can do a better job as board president so they can understand the organization better. And if that person uses that skill in order to, create a side business, this is honestly some of the reasons why people volunteer for boards, because they get increased skills, increased experience by donating and volunteering their time. So the private inurement piece comes into play is if you were paying that board president for those counseling services that he was providing. Does that make sense?
Okay, so yeah, well, so the person that got, so if they use that certificate and it's now qualified as an expert, they can take those skills that they learned, although it's paid for by the other company, but they can now use them and use them to their benefits without, that's what you were saying, right? That would be okay.
Exactly.
That would be okay.
Yes.
But
yes.
But as long as they're not using, so you're saying, as long as they're not using, they're being paid by the original nonprofit to do certain.
As long as they're not charging the nonprofit to train them, that would be the conflict.
Okay.
Good. All right, my last slide actually.
Thank you.
What I want you to do in the chat is this. So given this information, what can you do in the next 3 days or the next 3 weeks or the next 3 months that could benefit your organization based upon this training today? What can you do? What actions can you take in the next 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months in order to put some of this information into practice? What can you do? Just drop it into the chat. My chat storm right there. What can you do in the next 3 days, next 3 weeks, next 3 months with this information? What could you do? Review your bylaws. That's excellent. Board of Directors manual. Yes. Active, absolutely. Share this with your board. Committees. Yes. Excellent. Skills matrix. Yes. Wonderful. A retreat. Always good. Reevaluate the board duties. Yes. Bylaws, handbook. Yes. Get to know your board better. I love that. Yes. Review your bylaws. Revisit the bylaws. Invite new and youth board members. Create a board handbook. Excellent. Yes. Your board training on management. Yes. Super helpful. Yes. Do a SWOT analysis with your board. Yes. As a new team member, I can get to know the board. Absolutely. Understand their roles. Review the manual and tools that I'm sending over. Yes, make sure you get them. And it was done by some work done by my graduate students. So it was the best in the class. So I'm going to share that with you so you have it. Create a better relationship with the board. Excellent. That's a great idea. Yes. Look for some board training locally. That's a great idea too. The SWOT analysis, the board matrix. Okay, Mercedes, you got a busy 3 months. Excellent. All right, excellent. That's awesome. All right, this is great. This is really good. Skills matrix. Yes, matrix. Good. Yes. Excellent. All right, and this is what you'll get. Review board life conservation. Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's awesome. Good. You'll get we'll follow up where you're gonna get the slides. I'm gonna send you the link to the board manual. I also saw recommendations for books. I'll add that to the list and make sure you get what you need. And that'll be awesome. I also, yep, so I'm gonna share the screen for the last bit. So I'll put in your toolbox the sample board manual so you'll have it. And the next session is on fund development strategy. All about thinking about how we strategically think about raising resources. So I'll see you on July 25th and I'll be prepared to share some other good information for you. Good.
Dr. Madden, could you also include anything on succession planning in the toolbox? Thank you.
Yes. Succession planning.
Brilliant training. Where were you 20 years ago?
Thank you. So succession planning, do you want it for the executive director? Is that what you're thinking through? You're on mute. You're on mute though. Uh-oh. So I think you're on mute, but I think you want the executive director succession planning. Yes.
Yes, for my staff
Okay,
and for my board. It's not going to always be me. I'm going to have to hand over the torch one day. So
honestly,
I need
succession planning is, yes, it's a smart thing. Many nonprofits don't do it. The only reason I think COVID is the one time where we really start thinking about, okay, this succession planning does matter to the organization. So I'm making a note to put some resources together for you.
Thank you so much. We need to have our organizations run like a smooth operation with or without us. So I think that tool will help me. Thank you. Brilliant training.
Thank you. And it does tie with thinking about how do you cultivate and build that next level of leadership, you know. And again, I love the way you're thinking because that's square on like 10 best practices of good executive directors. So good.